It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome to the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is Friday, May 19th, and so happy for you joining us, and we are ready to start another day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. So what do we have in today's exciting podcast for you? We have Until the End Mental Health Podcast with Daniel Baker, the Wednesday Message Word Study, and of course, commentaries, updates, and news on what is happening around the world in this history today. All right, everyone, how are you doing? You must feel great because it is Friday already. Yes, the whole week has gone by. The work week is going to be done pretty soon. We have the entire weekend ahead of us, and I'm sure all of you guys are going to enjoy, have plans, or whatever it is, doing your missions, going to church. There's a bunch of things that we can do, so I'm super happy and hope that you guys can fulfill this week's life, right, in the fullest in everything that you do. All right, so if you haven't yet, go ahead, leave a like, a comment, and the most important thing about this this platform is to build our community, and just really happy for everyone joining us every weekday on the Morning Star Drive. So let's get up and support each other each and every day. It's Friday already, and it's like the first full week of podcasting segments. This week we've had this is the fifth podcast of the week, like we do Monday to Friday. We had the Man Cave on Monday. We had Love and Life on Love and Life on Tuesday? The Provi Puff Girls on Thursday. Friday is going to be the Prayer Podcast. And of course, tomorrow we have Provi Com. That's the 4th edition, which is a video from Chris Jansen over there in the US. So it's a full-packed week, and super excited and thankful that all of you guys are joining us here. And, one of the things that's really amazing and awesome that I love about having these packed schedules with a lot of different podcasts going on is the comment section begins to blow up even more. Lots of different discussions and topics. I love it. I see some of the comments. I just want to talk about them more and more. And I'm thankful that we have these podcasts to make everyone think a little bit more deeply about the different things that are going on in this life, right? So, Provi Puff Girls was yesterday. We got a lot of comments, a lot of views on that too. How did you like that episode? I'm sure a lot of girls... I was gonna say something so like the Man Cave versus the Provi Puff Girls. I'm like going, how did you like the episode of Provi Puff Girls? I'm like, I'm sure the girls hated it since girls get really jealous of each other really quickly. I'm just kidding. It was a joke. I put this joke and I'm like, should I say it? Should I not? But come on. We're family here, so you guys know that I come in with good intentions. It's just here to make each other laugh. So I'm really happy about this. Cool thing happened to me this morning. So, I woke up in the morning. I went to exercise at the gym. And after, I usually go to the cafe to prepare for the podcast and stuff like that too, right? So it was kind of a surreal, not surreal, but it was an amazing experience for me because there's a brand new worker there, and for some reason she was at the cafe not working but doing her own stuff there at the cafe that she's working at, which I'm like, that's kind of weird. No one really likes to be at the place they work at, right? But while I ordered my latte, and while I'm waiting for my latte, I struck up a conversation with her, and we ended up talking about faith. We ended up talking. She's like, oh, so you're a missionary, you're a pastor. I'm someone who's trying to think about what I should get into. And, we just had a great conversation for about an hour, just talking about faith, why I have faith, what's the purpose of faith, why I believe in Jesus. And, at the end of the hour, I decided to move to another table, because I need to get this work done for the podcast, and I know that sitting beside her, I'd probably just be talking to her more and more. So I just moved to. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna go to the table because I need to get this work done." She's like, "Yeah, that's good." But I was really inspired. It was almost like God put her there to help me to get my mouth moving again, like meeting people and talking to them and sharing the gospel. And I really enjoyed it. Of course, I haven't done it in a long time, like talking face to face with someone. A lot of times in there, I was like, my brain was working like overtime, trying to think about the next thing to say, what's something that would be inspiring. And I was just like, wow. But I was so thankful that I could just plant the seed of faith. I wasn't there to go evangelize her and tell her that, hey, you have to go to church, you have to do all these different things. Let me get your phone number so that we can do Bible study. I didn't do any of that. I just planted a seed, and even that made me feel really good. Because, I don't know how long I'll be here. I don't know how ready she really is. I've only talked to her for like 1 hour, right? But just the conversation we had was really good. Young, just graduated from university. She's thinking about her life, what she wants to do next. But it was really, really cool to have that conversation. And it really made me think even more deeply, right? Like, man, we got to get back into sharing the gospel. There are people out there who are like drowning, not drowning, but I don't know what the right word is, but they're kind of lost. Like they're in a forest, lost with life, not sure what to do. Because when I brought up the word emptiness, she's like, it's so true, right? Like everyone gets into that situation where they're not sure why they're doing this, right? They're not sure why they're doing it, right? What's the whole purpose of all these things? And I was telling her, like, when your mother's Buddhist, your dad's kind of agnostic, just dabbling in other different religions. But, the one question that you should be getting answered when it comes to faith, because faith is about eternity, like what is the whole reason of living in this life right now, is why are you here? Like, why were you created? Why were you made? And that is something that we really have to think about. Like when I was talking to her, she's like, yeah, that's so true. And we were just talking about relationships with God, how to get closer to God. And I was very excited about it. Really. I was super excited just having that conversation. And it makes me want to have more conversations with the people too. So that was something that I was like, wow, that's really amazing that God led me to have that conversation, to kind of just spark up that heart, those thoughts in my heart once again, to do, to work for God, to run in this history too. So I was very thankful for that. All right. So we have a bunch of different comments. And like I said, these comments are all popping up from all the different episodes of Provi Puff Girls and Man Cave, Love and Life, and everyone's bringing up these comments, and I love them, right? And some of them comments come from the things I talked about here. Like one of the comments from, is it from Provi Puff? Let me just find this comment. This comment, I love this comment. And this one is from the Man Cave. And this is Kazune from Japan, and she's like, she talked, because during the Man Cave, we talked about married male leaders would have to ask their wives to work, right? And, there's a lot of leaders in Japan where the male leader's wife's mission is to provide for the family, which, and then Kazune says, I've felt weird about, since they also say female leaders can't be married because mothers play an important role for the kids, which she agrees with. But then if that was the case, then the male leader and wife provide, if that was a case where the woman, they're trying to raise the family, but if the sole purpose of the wife of a male leader is to become the provider, then she's going to be just as busy, not taking care of her kids, because she's like doing a full-time job and stuff. So that doesn't really make any sense, right? So she did have two solutions, which makes sense to me too, is either to never have married, to have all leaders don't get married, or just pay the leaders enough to provide for their family, right? So, like, what do I think about this? I think it's a great question. But if we were to talk about what is the most ideal situation, personally speaking, this is just from my opinion. This is my opinion. I do think there is an absolute benefit of having a married leader. I do. And when someone is married and they have children, they have absolute responsibility. They have their children they have to provide for. It's a different level of maturity, right? Even one of the psychologists I listened to said, the reason why people don't truly become mature and responsible until they truly have kids is because that's the only time they put someone else above themselves. And that's when you are truly mature, right? And when I think about this, like when I look at the former faith churches, I think they do it right. Basically, I think one of the things that we don't know much about in Providence is the role of the pastor's wife. And you might think to yourself, like, what? There is a role? Because in most cases, because we're in a pioneering stage, the wife usually is the provider, working and doing all the, working full time and making money while the husband is going out, pastoring a church. That's all we've seen in Providence. But when you see how the role of a pastor's wife, it's really amazing. She's basically like a pastor herself. And a lot of these great big churches, the wife plays such a huge role, taking care of the wives and the mothers. She literally plays a motherly role, right? And I think one of the not just having that role of the pastor's wife, but you kind of like one of the things that I found that was difficult for myself being a head leader is I would always go home to an empty house. I would always go, no matter how tired I was, sometimes just so tired, I'm going to have to cook ramen, right? Because, I'm just tired, exhausted. I don't want to do all the cooking, or I'll go out and spend more money, right? So the best and most ideal way, I do believe, is pastors should be paid enough to support their families. Like having like 2 kids, 3 kids. They should have enough. And I think this is what is normal and proper when it comes to head leaders. Like, this is a thing that kind of doesn't make sense to me. I was a head leader myself, but we put such an emphasis on the spiritual life. It's the most important thing, spiritual life, right? Excuse me. And if we really, really say that the spiritual life is that important, then the thing that doesn't make sense to me is we're putting such an emphasis and importance on the spiritual life, but then the leader who is there to take care of the spiritual lives is paid less than someone who gets minimum wage in their country. Which, tell me that doesn't make sense, right? If we really put an emphasis and the importance of having a spiritual leader, and the spiritual life is the most important thing, then why wouldn't they be paid sufficiently? Not being rich, but sufficient enough for them to live on their own, provide themselves a family too, right? And, if you think about even, like, I would even say this, like, what about female leaders? Female leaders, I understand. Like, it's harder if they're going to have a family with kids and stuff. And it's harder for them to be married and have raise a family while being like a head leader of a church, right? But that's where I do think imagine you have a female head leader, and then the husband, it's kind of like a reverse role, and the husband is working in the company, in the business, and I don't think it's impossible. I think it's hard, but I do think there is an absolute benefit of having a married leader. I really do, right? When your churches begin to grow, half your church is going to be families. Half your church. That's how big it's going to be, right? And there's going to be a huge difference of someone who's counseling another family when they're married, understanding the dynamics of marriage itself. I think there's going to be a huge difference. I do feel that there's going to be more. And, we can go more deeply into this, into the next man cave and the Provi Puff Girls, but I think it's a great question. And personally, I think the best and the easiest way is to pay your leaders enough so that they can support their own families, right? And you might think to yourself is like, well, there's so many issues that go on top of this. And what do I mean? Well, sometimes it comes back to, are the leaders equipped to be good leaders, right? Which always leads me back to that big point that I always make is, are they being trained to be real good head leaders? Because put it this way, if you're not trained, you're not going to have all the skills to be a head leader. So here's an untrained head leader, and they're getting paid a little bit, but if you want to raise the salary of a head leader, a lot of people are going to say, well, this head leader doesn't really do much. This head leader is really not that good anyways. And they don't want to pay them more. But then how do they get better if they don't have training, right? So it's kind of a circular loop where it's like, well, our head leaders are not trained, so they're not fully equipped to be a head leader. And then the head leaders were saying, pay them more. But then people are like, well, they're not that good. Or they're not fully equipped. But that's because they don't have training. So it kind of goes into a loop over and over and over again. And I'm just going to be super honest with you guys. As a head leader too, I didn't get training. it was just because I was good at something, which was lecturing and evangelism. That's what I was good at. And because of that, I was made a head leader, not knowing about the other skills I needed, like family counseling, individual counseling, career counseling, family visits, right? Most of it has to do with families too, right? And the older people, right? Taking care of younger people takes a lot of energy, but it doesn't take as much experience in life. Why? Because most of the leaders have already been through the campus and the SS life, so they understand it. But if you haven't been through the married life, that becomes a little bit more difficult, but that is another subject I want to talk about. But I would say the best and most ideal way is for churches, which I understand right now, a lot of churches are still in pioneering stages, is to give them enough to support their own families. I think that is definitely the best way to do it. So when you see this, I'm like this is a great question, or something that people can talk about when it comes to people listening to these other podcasts and getting new ideas. Like, oh, I never thought about this. Now, here's the one comment that I think I'm going to spend a lot more time on. All right, this is something that I looked at. I was like, oh, this is a comment that I think that needs to be addressed. Right? So in this comment, it says, thank you, Pastor Sky, for answering my question. After the documentary released, I always reflect on providence. Okay? So actually, I can't understand why the leaders have the power and authority to make guidelines and told the followers to follow. I want to follow God, not the leaders, actually. And for example, I really can't understand why people cannot make a boyfriend or girlfriend in Providence. Right? So there's the big thing. I can't understand why we can't have boyfriends or girlfriends in Providence. Who has the authority to say someone is mature or not? I think the leaders can't. Will they do some evaluation? But actually, no one really knows how other people live, and also it's people's privacy. God told us to grow and be mature first before marriage. If people evaluate themselves and they think they are mature enough, why can't they find a boyfriend or girlfriend if they want? I think the leaders cannot say someone is mature or not. Actually, there are many people who leave because they made a boyfriend or girlfriend. And I know some of them still believe in God and go to a Christian church. I just want to express my opinion on the guidelines the leaders set, not judging the leaders, right? So this is a very interesting question. And it came from my Tuesday podcast when I talked about what's the situation going on in Providence, right? And the thing that I wanted to say absolutely is my answer came from, it's because of the special, unique circumstance that we're in that we have to be a bit more flexible. It's only because of that. Only because the ratio of guys to girls is so far apart, there is no other choice. Which means if it was ideal, if the ratio was like 1-to-1, we wouldn't have to worry about this. Right? We wouldn't have to think about, oh my gosh, are we going to have to find someone else? That's something that we would never have to think about. The only reason I talked about that is because we are in a situation and circumstance that is very off. It's not proper. It's not ideal. So that's why I'm not saying this is the right thing. It's basically we're stuck in a corner without any choice. Now, there's a couple things that I really want to talk about. First is, do leaders have the power and authority to make guidelines and make followers follow? Okay, that's a big question. Now, can they force you? And the answer is obviously not. They can't force you. But let me talk about what the world is like, because this is the world that we live in, and this is something that is rational and normal to have leaders make guidelines that we follow. It's a normal thing that we do in all of society, right? Look at every organization in the world, and they have every right. The organization itself has every right to make the rules of their organization. And their rules might be things that are even legal in a certain country. But to them, they'll say no. Right? So it's not following the rules of the land. It's following the rules of that organization. Right? So for instance, let me give you an example. Just recently, there's an NBA player, 24 years old. His contract is worth $191 million. His name is Ja Morant, okay? Recently suspended from the league indefinitely. Why? Because on Instagram Live, he was in a car listening to music, and then he showed a gun. He had a gun on him, okay? Now, here's the thing. He lives in a state in America where you don't need a permit. It's legal to carry a gun anywhere, anytime, no permit, in a car, anywhere you go. But here's the thing. Even though it's not illegal, the private organization of the NBA makes guidelines and rules in order for you to stay in that organization. And if he wants to be paid the $191 million, he needs to abide by the laws of the organization, not by the laws of the world, not by the laws of your country or your city, by the laws of that private organization. And that's why, even though he did nothing illegal, he is suspended indefinitely, and now he has a chance of losing his $191 million contract. He could lose his Nike contract too. And it wasn't illegal. It was legal in his country, but it was illegal to the organization. So let me ask you this question. If you had a contract for $191 million and you are an employee of the NBA and they say to you, you can't carry guns, what would you do? Would you say, screw the $191 million, screw the Nike contract, I'm just going to do whatever I want? Well, he does everything he wants, and then he is now in threat to no longer be part of that organization, which means what? If you want to be part of any corporation, your work, imagine your work is always dress in a suit. If you don't dress in a suit, it's not illegal to not dress in a suit, but in that organization, you have to abide by those rules. It's normal in society for any organization to make rules and regulations that their people inside their organization must follow, or they can no longer be in that organization. Do people have freedom to not wear a suit? Absolutely. They don't have to wear a suit. It's not illegal not to wear a suit. However, for that company, their bylaws, their regulations, their policies make it so you have to. Or else, you can't stay in there. Every good organization needs laws and guidelines. Laws are what are absolute. The guidelines are strongly recommended, right? They can't force you to do it, but if you want to be in that organization, you have to listen to those laws. So what I talked about on Tuesday was what? The question was about leaders giving these regulations and guidelines, right? And I was telling you that it was only because of the special circumstance. I would not say anything about it if we were one-to-one guy ratio, because no one would be like, oh, okay, there's no problem kind of thing, right? The only reason I talk about being flexible because the situation is it's not ideal. It's so extremely not ideal. And we have to react to the situation we're facing, right? That's why at the end of my Tuesday podcast, I said, guess what, guys? Each country has their own culture, their own style. It's up to the leadership to decide. Now, here's the thing. Why do I need to listen to the leaders? Well, why is it up to leadership? Think about it carefully when you think about any organization you join in this world and why it shouldn't be any different in Providence. If every individual makes up their own rules, can you imagine how chaotic and how crazy your organization would be? If everyone just made up everything according to their own thoughts. And this is why it becomes a little bit crazy right now when you look at the world and how they look at gender and stuff like that, right? When they look at gender, people are just coming up with their own things. We don't know what it is. We have a basic law and guideline. There's a male and a female. But then people are saying, no, I want to do what I feel. It's about what I feel. I feel like a woman today, but maybe in an hour I'll feel like a male. It brings chaos to the world. Tons of problems will come up if we base everything on individuals making up their own minds when it comes to an organization that is large. In an organization, when we join an organization, when we join a religion, we join a society, we join a school, we give up our decisions to a larger body where their main focus is for the whole. That's normal, right? It's not like you join Facebook and you're like higher than the CEO. You have to listen to the CEO. You have to listen to your managers, to your superiors. That is absolutely normal. Every organization, we have like we have the leadership, and with the leadership, think about this. When you think about the things that are unfair to you, you are basically only thinking about yourself. That's the main thing you're thinking about. The power of the people in any organization is if leadership is, corrupt. If leadership is taking advantage of their power, then the power of the people is to discuss with leadership, give ideas, give them feedback. And if they are abusing their power, if they are corrupt, then the power of the people is to replace the leaders. The one thing that we have to understand when it comes to leadership, because I've been in leadership position, is leadership thinks of the whole. Even if you, and let me give you another example, is just because you don't agree, does it mean it's wrong? And the answer is absolutely not. Leadership's thinking of the whole, and guess what? Every decision leadership makes when it comes to a large group of people, is everyone happy? And the answer is no way. Not everyone's happy. Not everyone agrees with it, but why do they still follow it? Because that's why we agree to be in a certain organization. If you can't put up with it, if you can't do what the organization is asking for, then, eventually you're not going to stay in the organization. You'll move to another organization that might fit you better. And this is why we have to think deeply about this. Just because leadership says something, yeah, it's true. You don't have to do it. That's true. But if you're in that organization, you give up your decision power to leadership because we are giving them the power because we are hoping, and we are, our assumption is they are thinking about the whole, and the whole is not thinking just about me, right? And the thing we have to think about even more deeply is we're not just in any organization. We're in the history of God. Being in this history is about knowing that we don't want to do things the way the world does anymore. This is God's history. This is not about living our lives like the world. This is not about living our lives like everyone else does. Because we know that it doesn't work in the world. People are still unhappy. They have no direction. There's meaninglessness. There's emptiness. We're here to fulfill something so big as to fulfill the purpose of creation. And it's not a light matter. And especially when it comes to things like dating or relationships, one thing that we've learned, which is so one of the most the severity degree of what we understand about the fall, makes everything different. We're here in the history of God to follow what God wants, the way that God wants to do it. We're not called to live like the world, but we're called to be different from it, cleaner, pure, doing things in ways that's not like the world. And honestly, when it comes to relationships, personally speaking, I don't like the way the world does it. The world does it in such a way that the divorce rate is more than 50% in most countries. When I was in Southeast Asia, I went to Thailand. Guess what? The most common thing that I saw in Thailand is that single girls with children, no husband. And there are so many of them. Is that ideal? Is that the way it should be? That, I like this person, so then I should, be with this person? I don't think that's the right. Personally, I look at that as the broken way to do it. The comment was, why can't people make a boyfriend or girlfriend in Providence? And then the comment was brought up also about maturity. And I'm going to be brutally honest with people in Provi too, because I've been 25 years. My question to you is, what makes you mature? Is it just because you think you're mature makes you mature? I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of people are not self-aware. They think they're mature. They're totally not. It's when someone is mature, when someone is immature, everyone sees it. Because maturity in Providence is not just a physical age. Because when are you physically mature? When you can have babies. That's when you're physically mature. So does that mean all of us should be, going to relationships when you're 12, 13, 14 years old? And the answer is no way. Because the next step is mental maturity. Are you mentally mature? That's something that you may not be able to understand on your own because you don't see yourself. You don't see how you talk to others. You don't see how your body language. People see it. I don't think people should make up their own minds that, oh, I'm mature. I don't think they can. I don't think people are objective enough about themselves. They can't see themselves. They don't hear how they speak to others. They don't see their body language. They don't see how they act. If someone is truly mature, everyone can see it. But the one thing that we have to take into consideration more, people may be able to see if they are physical is the easiest. Mental maturity is probably a little bit harder. But in providence, that's not enough. What about spiritual maturity? Do you even do basic faith? How is your basic faith? That's just the basic. There's nothing beyond that. So if I said, how's your basic physical life? I eat 3 times a day, I sleep, I work. Yeah. Physically speaking, I've done my basics. But would you base your this person, they're so good. Why? Because they eat 3 times a day, they sleep when they should, and they exercise. So, I want to marry this person. Like, no way. You wouldn't base it on the basics. You base it on something beyond the basics. Basic faith is just the basic assessment of spiritual maturity. I agree with the Providence method, and I think it's far better than the world. We shouldn't be like the world. I want people to be vetted. I do. If you guys understand what happens in the world, how much deception goes on in the world, have you seen like these Instagram people? When you look at the reality of them, a lot of them are renting these exotic cars. A lot of them are going into debt, traveling to all these different places. I think people need counseling. Not counseling as in, like mental health counseling. I do think people need to go through some type of counseling to figure out where they are in life. If we start doing things like the world, I think you're going to have way more problems. Because let's think about a couple of the problems. When people aren't mature, they cause problems, right? More mistakes happen because you're not mature. So let me give you an example. Let's say you think you're mature, but really you're not. What's going to happen? You're going to cause a lot of problems. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Or you are mature, but how do you know your partner's mature? And if how would you know who is the right person inside Providence unless you don't gather all the people that are mature, right? And then they can find they're not mature. Even if you're mature, but if the person you're looking at is not mature, you're going to make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Well, especially we know the severity and degree of the fall. Controlling physical desire in a relationship, that's not easy. Even getting close to the fall we're like, no, we got to stay pure. Now the question is can people individually on their own say, that they're mature or not? And I'd say no. I honestly don't think it should just be you who say you're mature. I don't think it's proper. I don't think you can really objectively look at yourself that way. Because let's be honest, guys. How many times have you seen someone who acts or says they're mature, but inside your head you're like, oh my gosh, this person's delusional. They are totally not mature. It's an honest assessment. Physically mature, don't you, for me too, even physical maturity or responsibility is, how much debt do you have? Don't you want to know that? Don't you want to know if they have cancer? Don't you want to know if they have all these physical ailments or whatever it is? That's just physical. But human beings, we're going to base physically on how cute they are or how they look. Mental health, that's another big issue. And then spiritual, that's the main thing we're looking at. I think there's going to be far more issues if people go out on their own. I think it's just like the world. That's why Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but we're here in this history of God to find the way God wants to do it, right? So when you think about who came up with the method of blessing, it's not your leaders. Your leaders aren't the one coming up with this method. It's the original method that has been done since the beginning of providence. Is the method perfect? Not yet. But it's going to change as it goes. But it's not going to go so far off from what it was before. When you read the Bible, have you ever heard of dating in the Bible? It doesn't exist. Ever. It doesn't. So when you think about this, marriage is the most holy event in your life. It is the fulfillment of the physical purpose of creation. It is not something you just do on your own. What makes Providence so much different, it's truly a spiritual event. You open your heart, not to the opposite sex, but to the Holy Spirit to inspire and lead you. That's why I find it way better here than doing it like the world. When I look at how, leadership is going to make some guidelines that fits their country, but ultimately the core of it comes from Sunstein, the man of mission, right? The man of mission who's receiving it from God. It's not about, do leaders have the right? Do they have the authority? And the answer is, you gave the authority to them because you're in this organization, in the history of God. And that's a normal thing. Like, I don't see anyone complaining about this when it comes to working in another organization outside in the world. That's a normal thing. And when do people rise up is when they think people are corrupt or they're not thinking in the best interest of the people as a whole. But it shouldn't be an individual thing. Right? I think this is a very, very good comment to think about. It needs to be addressed. Remember, the leaders are not the one making the blessing and the core of the blessing. They're following what the man of mission has prescribed. The only thing that they are doing is trying their best to make sure that we follow a good guideline that will ensure that we will do things properly and purely, spiritually. Do we have perfect guidelines? The answer is no, we don't. But they are given to us, right? But the leaders are given such a difficult task to figure this out. It's not easy. And this is why we need to pray for them. This is why we need to give feedback. We do. And we don't give feedback thinking or expecting them, they have to put it into, they have to listen to it. Well, they're going to listen to it, but it doesn't mean they have to do it. Think about it. If 20 people give feedback, you think you can do all of it? And the answer is no. The leadership has to decide as a group what is the best thing. Remember, we're not just an organization. We're, generally speaking, in the general form, we are an organization, which means we do things in the same way as any other organization. There's leadership that makes the decision for the whole company, right? Just like in Providence, we have the leadership to make the spiritual decisions for the whole. But even deeper is we're not a worldly organization. We're in the history of God. And we're not doing things the way the world does. We do it the way God originally intended. And that is something we all have to understand really deeply in our hearts. Will our leaders make mistakes? Absolutely. But as members, we have to support them. As members, we have to give feedback, right? And understand the situation of the leaders. Because I've been a leader, right? Some things I don't agree with, but when I became a leader, I'm like, oh man, no wonder. Oh, this is so hard. This is harder than I thought it was. Pray for your leaders. Help them whenever you can. But I think going down that direction of people doing things because they think they're mature and all of a sudden just go into relationships and make boyfriends and girlfriends, I think that's a slippery slope, very slippery slope. And if you have a large organization with, we're a large organization, tens of thousands of people all over the world. you can't do it in the free-for-all way. And maybe if our country or if your church is like 10 people, that would make a little bit more sense to be a little bit more free. But once you've grown your church, you can't just do things the way that you want. We have to do things understanding the reasons behind it, right? Remember, like I said, the only reason I brought up the answer, what I said on Tuesday, was because someone was, the person was asking about it in the comments. But by no means am I saying people should just start dating and finding someone else, finding someone inside Providence. Like that's the way, just go out and do it. No, we need guidelines. We do. Without guidelines, we don't know how far to go, right? So I hope that we take pride in this history, understanding why we don't do things the same as the world. And this is something that's, you have to understand is even in the former faith churches, they have this, the same thing. Before people get married, they counsel with the pastor. They do. And even in some churches, a little bit more stricter, they counsel before they date. We came into this history because we don't want to be like the world, because the way the world does it is meaningless. The way the world does it doesn't work. We didn't come here to just do whatever we want. We come here for faith. Faith is to figure out what God wants. What is God's will? What's the God's method? Right? And we can't compare it to the world. Some things we just can't compare it because when you look at the way the world does it, it's not very good. And I don't think it's good to revert back to the ways of the world and make it a norm. If we do it like that, I think it's a very slippery slope. Now, the blessing that we have right now, is it fully developed? Absolutely not. But I would look at it and say, oh, it's far better than the world. There's no way, we don't even have anything close to a 50% divorce rate. Not even close to it. Why? Because ours is centered on God. God who knows us better than we know ourselves. Right? So my point on Tuesday was mainly, this is our situation. It's pretty bad. So we have to deal with it in the right way, but we need the right recommendations, guidelines for us to do it with, or else it's just going to become a free-for-all, which is, I think, is a very, very, I don't think it's the right way to do it. It's going to cause a lot more problems, right? It's only because of the situation. I don't think that if the situation was not like this, there's no way I would say any of those things. I would only be making recommendations of how to do the blessing in a different way, just tweaking it. Right? If the situation wasn't this bad, I wouldn't even think about revising the core of the system anyways. It's so much better. It's so much better. And I think it's something that we have to think carefully about. And I hope this helps you to understand why we do it this way. Why can't we just go off and make boyfriends and girlfriends because I think I'm mature, right? Because if you think about it, in Providence, it's not just physical, mental, but it's spiritual. So if you go off and find someone who's not spiritually mature, that makes a difference. That's one of the biggest reasons why Paul said, do not yoke yourself with an unbeliever. Because it actually brings you down, right? That's both in Old Testament and New Testament. You want to be with someone who has the same faith as you. You might not think it's big. You might think love is the biggest thing. No, it's not. It's not just love. You can't be loved just by itself. Remember, what are the 4 reasons why people divorce? 4 major reasons. Number 1 is money. Well, not number 1. 4 reasons. Number 1 is money. Number 2 is the couple deciding on family dynamics, their family. How many kids you want? Do you want kids? And how do you raise your kids? The third one is dealing with your in-laws. And the last one is ideology, which is religion or politics. If they don't align, there's a high chance of divorce. And in our case, it's a spiritual thing. And people have to think about this deeply and seriously. Why? It's the fulfillment of the purpose of creation. How did God originally intend for it to be? And that's why I think this is a good question. I think it's a great question because a lot of people do think, like, why can't we just do it like this, right? And sometimes it's either we didn't learn clearly or we forgot or, sometimes we just, sometimes our hearts go in a different direction than the way that God wants, right? So I hope this really helps you out because for me is talking about that on Tuesday is a little bit hard. I had to re-record it once because I was like, I don't want to give the feeling off that people should just go off and do whatever they want. Like, I don't want that feeling. People should have guidelines. They should. It shouldn't be just out of the blue, all of a sudden like, hey, I found a husband. And everyone's like, what? Like it shouldn't, I don't think it should be like that. Personally, I don't think so. I think it's something that we have to think very, very deeply of. And we want to do it the right way. Which way? God's way. So, that's why there's a lot of spiritual preparation for the blessing. More than anything else, it's spiritual. Because the physical and mental, you'll gain that as you grow. But that does not mean you are spiritually mature. And that's the number one thing that we look at, right? You want to make sure that you are mature and the person you find is spiritually mature too. Either way. So I thought that was a great point, great question. I went a little bit long on it, but I hope it's something that we can all think about even more deeply. Okay? So there it is, guys. Great comments. I'd love it. Love to talk deeply about things to make, go through these mental exercises and help you guys to understand a little bit better. And that will lead us into our first break for today.
Through all the wind and the trials, still we never did break. It really wasn't very easy to put trust in that state. So even though our castles in the sand tumbled down, but all our tears streamed down together to cement the foundation. The tears would out continuously every single day, and I wouldn't hold it back because I got through so much pain. Now I stand and shake the dust off as I cling onto your Lord who's right before me. Oh Lord, you'll always be the only answer.
I don't sit here wishing happiness will come round. I don't sit and wait for it to walk through my door. Happiness comes to those who take action on love. When I love with perfect faith,
Yeah, perfect faith.
happiness will fill my heart.
When I'm faced with the roadblock, I think, what would you do? Even so, with all that thinking, I fall further in distress and agony. When I leave those thoughts behind, it's a better life. I leave my suffering and failures far behind me. You saw me struggle to chase a brighter future. While running after happiness, I turn to you, our eyes connecting. As you switch, you flash a smile, and this is what you tell me. Let's create our own happiness, though times it may be difficult.
I don't sit here wishing happiness will come round. I don't sit and wait for it to walk through my door. Happiness comes to those who take action on love. When I love with perfect faith,
Yeah, perfect faith.
happiness will fill my heart. I'm not afraid, Lord, you have always been the answer for me. I'm not afraid, I'll hold your hand in mine.
Those days were once so painful and distressing. The massive waves that tore me down were scary and depressing. But though confusion, chaos, fear devoured me completely. The moment that I found you, I was spared out of the deep sea. Now all those moments in my life, no matter how I struggled, are precious and important cause they led me to our meeting. So now I'll never leave you, know my faith and love will not grow cold. And just as you have done for me, I will believe, I will love you more.
As long as I live, I pray only to look to your will. I'll offer prayers full of joy and happiness. I'll stand upon Christ as my rock. As long as I live, I pray only to look to your will. I'll offer prayers full of joy and happiness. I'll stand upon Christ as my rock. Love's always patient and kind. Love is always full of trust. Love is always full of hope. And love always perseveres. Love's always patient and kind. Love is always full of trust. Love is always full of hope. And through love we'll persevere here together.
All right, so let's get into today's word study for today. And of course, every single Friday, we do go over the Wednesday message. And I know that the Wednesday message is different from church to church. The core is the same, but it's a little bit different because everyone's listening to different leaders in that, right? So this week's Sunday message, consider absolute faith as life. Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27, and 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 18 and 19. So let's, I like I said before on the Monday podcast, I really like the story of Jesus calming the storm, where it is so relevant to the time we're living in right now, right? And one point that the pastor was making was, when we hear the word for the first time and we decide to take action and believe in this history, it's so easy. But when difficulties come, we wonder if we can survive, and sometimes it feels like the Holy Trinity and Jesus are far away, or it's like we can't even reach them, right? So in the past, we felt so close, but it feels like we can't feel anything right now. And the one thing that we've heard time and time again is, no, they're still there, right? Still there. It's just that being in the time of difficulty, it's hard for us to feel them, right? And this is why we're called to have absolute belief and trust. And put our trust in the Holy Trinity and Jesus and the man of mission. And I think this is not any different than how we live our lives in the world too. So, for instance, to have absolute belief and trust is kind of it sounds like love itself, which means that think about a marriage. Even in a marriage too, what's going to happen is sometimes you're going to go through some difficult times where you can't feel the love from your husband or wife. And during those times, because we love them, we still believe and trust in them, right? And that's why we have to remember all the things in the past, our vows that we made and how much we fell in love with this person. And that's why we'll stay with them through thick and thin. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to think about when it comes to us falling in love with God and the Trinity and with Jesus and the man of mission. We fall in love, and when we fall in love, that no matter how difficult it gets, we're okay and we can continue with what we're going through, right? Through all the things that we hear, one of the big things we have to understand is if you forget the word that we've heard until now, it is impossible to navigate through the winds and waves of life, right? That is all done. The navigation of life is done through the words of God, understanding how God thinks, understanding the ways and methods of God, right? Whether it's loving your enemies, praying for your enemies, forgiving your enemies, right? Doing things until the end, not giving up. There's a lot of these deep principles that we learn in here that will help us to navigate through life, right? And that's why we can't forget the words. Yes, we have the distractions and the difficulties, tribulations, and trials all in front of our eyes right now, which makes it feel like, oh, there's so many things going on. What's happening here? What's happening there, right? But if we remember the word, we're like, yeah, but God said this was going to happen. And God says we have to pull through. And God says we have to, oh yeah, God's taught us about this already. And with those words, it navigates us through it, right? So I hope it's something that all of us too really take into consideration during this time also, right? And, right now, I hope that everyone, even in this difficult time, can take action. And we're called to take action on the words of this time period. So let's be those that really live with this absolute faith, right? So, this week's message, the key about this week's message I liked is not about, hey, gain faith again. It's a message for you to keep your faith, keep the faith you already have, keep the eternal blessings, right? And I think this is a great message. It's like, hey, I'm just going to teach you how to keep the faith and keep the blessings you've already gained into this time and not lose anything, right? Because the importance of faith is, when we have faith, our actions are determined, or we take action according to our faith, right? And then what do actions do? Actions determine our destiny. So everything starts with faith is, what kind of faith do I have right now? Because that will change my actions, and my actions will determine my destiny, the outcome of my life. And that's why this faith that we have right now becomes a very, very important part of our life, right? One point that we look at, which is very, very important, is all your past actions of faith, everything that you've done amazing and awesome until this time, you can lose everything if you give up right now. Once you shatter your faith, all the stuff in the past you can't collect, right? It reminds me actually of my brother working at Starbucks. My brother works at Starbucks. What happens is every paycheck, you have a choice to buy stocks from Starbucks. You could buy stocks from there, right? However, I believe you cannot cash out those stocks until like 2 months after, right? So what happens is, and also, I believe there was another rule about the stocks too. Like you have to wait like for like a year or something along that line. But if you quit within that year, you can't collect those. Even if you got those stocks off your paycheck, you can't sell them right away, and a lot of them you just lose because you quit the job, right? So for us, some team asked God about what happens to our old merits, and God's like, "Yeah, I repaid all your merits at all times according to your deeds." And even if it's unpaid, right, the things that you still need to get, people have to go until the end for you to receive those rewards. And of course, the ultimate reward is what? The ultimate reward, which is the greatest reward, which is salvation of your spirit. So even if you worked hard in the past, if you forsake your faith right now, everything comes to an end. And the best example that I heard is even if you kept a healthy body, eating good food and exercising, the moment you die in a car crash, it doesn't matter how healthily you lived before. Healthy, how healthy you lived before. And in the same way, your life of faith ends when you stop believing. And that's why we have to do things until the end to gain all the blessings that we need, right? So, this week's message, very, very powerful one, right? Even a baby that's growing in the stomach, if you don't completely mature, then when you're born, you're either crippled or you might not even be viable to be living. And that's why we have to keep faith until the end, until we go into the next life. We have to be those, right, that kind of pull ourselves out of that suffering. Like sometimes we put ourselves into suffering because we have the wrong thoughts. Sometimes we put ourselves into suffering because of a situation we're going through right now, and we may think to ourselves that God is not helping or God is not with us. But we have to go to another level, right? We have to be those that in order for us to get out of the situation, we have to take action 100%, right? And part of taking action comes from this week's message, which is forgiving each other 100%. And here's the thing. If you don't forgive, you can't come out from the suffering of sin. If you don't repent or forgive each other 100%. That's part of the reasons we suffer, is not forgiving someone. You hold something against them. You have animosity, anger. You have resentment inside your heart, and it causes you to suffer every time you think or see that person. You have to forgive 100%. You have to forgive. That's part of coming out of the suffering of sin. And that's why even last week's message, you've got to do it according to the will. Why did God call us here? God called us here not to just have faith, but ultimately it's to fulfill the purpose of creation both physically and spiritually. And what do? We live as the counterparts of love for God. So how does fulfilling the purpose of creation physically fulfill the spiritual purpose of creation? Well, one of the things that interesting, I was telling you at the beginning of today's episode, I was talking to that worker of the cafe, and I said that, why does the Bible say in 1 John chapter 4 that you have to love one another? Because if you don't love, you don't know God, because God is love. When you learn to love, when you learn more and more deeply about love in this world, when you love your husbands, your wives, your children, your family, your friends, whatever it is, you are essentially learning about God, because God is love. And this is why fulfilling the purpose of creation on the earth it's a very big thing. Because we're not only, producing and bringing offspring of faith, we're also learning more and more deeply about God. God has called us for this reason, to fulfill the purpose of creation and to live as the counterparts of love for our body's entire lifetime. And I think that's really important for us to think about, is our entire lifetime is having this faith. It's not having that spurt of faith at the very beginning, then doing nothing after. It's a lifetime of faith. And when you look at that faith, how do we get that faith? That faith starts by listening to the words from the one that God has sent, believing and following, right? Faith is believing in what God has done through the person he sent. I think one of the things that we might have to think about even more deeply is, and I think this is a very important thing, and one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast, is sometimes we may not have learned deeply at the beginning. Because, this week's message is about teach them well from the beginning, then they will do well. Right? If you teach them well, then the Holy Spirit works upon them. Teach them well, they'll be inspired. Teach them well, they'll believe well. And we want to be those that teach well, but part of teaching well, just because you teach well doesn't mean people are going to do well. Because the second half is our responsibility is there a fertile field? Are you sowing the seeds? No matter how good you teach, are you sowing those seeds into a fertile field? Because if it's not a fertile field, what happens? If it's not a fertile field, then your efforts are wasted, no matter how good of a teacher you are. Eventually, people have to reach that stage where they can live the life of faith on their own, taking care of others, not always being taken care of. They must be people with that firm foundation so they can live that 100% faith, but we're not always taking care of them. We're not always worried about them. And, Sussie's talked about this many times. Who are you evangelizing? Yeah, you're matchmaking for God. Is the field fertile? It's not about the looks, not about anything else. Is the field fertile? So no matter what we hear from people, all the different things that we're hearing right now in this time of tribulation, it's about that love between you and God. Can you keep the faith? Can you keep that love even during the darkest times? One thing I like from the message is like, if you shatter your faith, like once you forsake it, you never get back. But who's to blame? It's only you. And I like this because it brings accountability and responsibility to all of us here. You can't blame anyone else. Yeah, we can get mad because some people were telling people to leave and this, and that. But ultimately, it's up to that person to make that mind up. And that's why you can't fully blame someone who's trying to pull people out of providence. Why? Because people make their own choice. People shipwreck their own faith. And that's why you have to be accountable for your life, accountable for your faith. So I hope that all of us too, we got to have that absolute faith from this week's message. Then we'll gain salvation. We'll inherit the golden heaven. Don't get confused. Don't forsake your faith because of what people say, right? And even if you do get a little bit confused, come back right away. Right? This is a great point that God wants to make to all of us here is, even if you get confused, even if you turn your back for a moment, quickly come back. And it's the same as a tree being uprooted. The moment you put the tree back up and you put the roots back into the ground, it'll live again. But if you do not put that tree back up again, what's going to happen? As time passes, the more and more time that passes, the harder and the longer it takes to restore, or it reaches a point it cannot be restored anymore. Put it back right away. Yeah, some of us might be struggling a little bit here and there. If that tree's uprooted, quickly plant it again, and you're not going to lose any of the merits from the past. We have to be the people that never lose the Holy Trinity, never lose Jesus and the man of mission. Remember, this is a love issue. More than faith, it's a love issue. When we call to love as a bride, it's not you are a bride only in good times. We are called to be brides of all times, right? So I hope it's something that all of us can think about more deeply, and we can have that mentality and mindset to do things in such a way we'll say, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's exactly what I wanted, right? And I hope that we'll consider absolute faith as life. It is life. Absolute faith is life. And once you lose absolute faith, yeah, you run towards the domain of death. So I hope you guys enjoyed the word study for today. I hope you guys gained something from it. If you have, go ahead and leave a comment below too, all right? So let's get into our second break.
A slave until I came and set you free, took away your pain and suffering, and I parted your Red Sea. You said thank you, hallelujah. This is heaven here on earth. I will live my life rejoicing, giving glory forever. As time went on, your heart changed. Your joy is gone. That's why I say, don't forget the love you had at first, the stories of the past, the promises you made, my love. Don't forget the value of this time, the blessings you received in my domain of grace and love. Don't forget, though you're weaker and outnumbered, I give you the upper hand. Took you from a barren desert to your fertile promised land. You said thank you, hallelujah. You delivered me again. So I'll give my life to you and I will follow till the end. As time went on, your heart changed. Your joy is gone. That's why I say, don't forget the love you had at first, the stories of the past, the promises you made, my love. Don't forget the value of this time, the blessings you received in my domain of grace and love. Don't forget. Cherish it, value it before it's too late, and everything you received gets taken away. Then you'll see that 1,000 years out there, it's nothing like just one day with me. Don't forget the love you had at first, the stories of the past, the promises you made, my love. Don't forget the value of this time, the blessings you received in my domain of grace and love. Don't forget, because 1,000 years out there, it's nothing like just one day with me.
All right, so let's get into today's last segment for today and for the entire week. This is Daniel Baker over there in Korea. Currently is on, he's traveling right now. So today's podcast that he's giving until the end, he's going to give a short testimony, especially with this week's message talking about testimonies, a short testimony about the crazy week that he had last week. And he doesn't have all of his equipment with him because he is traveling. So bear with the noise a little bit, but please welcome all the way over there in Korea, traveling at the moment, Daniel Baker from Korea with Until the End.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Do It Until the End podcast. Now, this week has been very crazy because I had 2 SS programs and right now I'm traveling because I came to come and see my family because my father got surgery and it seems like he's recovering well and the surgery went really well. So yeah, that's why my setup isn't correct and it's not my perfect crisp voice, but you know, the phone microphone is okay, so it should work. Now, today I want to give a testimony about something shocking that happened during my SS program this week. Yeah, it was something so shocking that after this whole situation and after all the shock, I was able to give glory to God in two ways. And I'll give you the basic story right now. So, yeah, we had an SS program that I was preparing for like a month, and it was a biking trip with the SS. So we were planning to bike 80 kilometers or 60 miles within a day, and it was going to take like 6 hours of biking and 25 SS. There's a lot of SS, right? And so it was one day of, you know, slumber party, sleepover, where we ate some fried chicken, we played some sports, we had a good time, we watched a movie, and then we slept. The next day we went, and it was this beautiful scenery over in the river where there's such a good biking path right next to the river where we would just take that for 80 kilometers. Now, yeah, it was so much fun. I was enjoying it so much. The scenery was beautiful, giving so much glory to God. And the way we traveled was we traveled in four different groups of 6 SS. And all four groups went at a different pace. The first group was very fast. Second group was medium fast, medium tempo, but you know, still decently fast. The third and fourth were a little bit slower guys, but also they were just taking their times. Mainly, you know, younger SS who are less experienced with bike riding. Yeah, so you know, an incident happened where which I wish did not happen, and even to this day I wish did not happen because it was just a really bad experience. So it was after lunch, and like 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers after lunch, we were biking well, and I saw the dreaded scene. You know, one of the random bikers telling us to slow down, and when I saw that, my heart dropped because I knew that one of my SS got hurt, and I didn't even know who it was, but I literally just got off my bike and just said, it's someone I know, let me through. And then I saw that it was an SS who, second year of middle school, very talented in sports, very athletic. He's one of my favorite SS. I don't like to give favorites, but he's one of my favorite SS because, you know, he's that kind of SS that is very good spiritually, comes to all of the programs. He is like a magnet to the other SSs, and he's like always the core of our SS. So yeah, it was a downhill portion that had a sudden uphill, and yeah, he tumbled off his bike and landed on his shoulder. So seeing him holding his shoulder in pain with a chipped tooth, it was really hard to see. But you know, during that time, I was constantly, you know, saying, it's okay, you know, we're going to get you help. And we called 119, which is 911 in Korea, to get the ambulance. And, you know, I went on the ambulance with him. We went to the urgent care emergency room. And yeah, after that, you know, I got some really bad news where, you know, he dislocated his shoulder, yes, but it was so bad that the doctor said that there's a good chance that he needs to get surgery. And after that, after getting that news, because of him getting the CT scan and the X-ray, I left because his father came. And yeah, that was a long trip home. Just a lot of depressive thoughts, because seeing someone you really care about hurting and crying, it's an experience that, as an SS leader, you have to step up and take care of this person. I can do it, but I really wish that I didn't have to do it, right? But it's the job I needed to do, right? So yeah, I was sure that he needed surgery. Now the next day, I went home after that. That's how I ended the trip. The next day we had an amazing festival. It was a sports festival between the Warmingdong Church and the Gumsan Church, and it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of volleyball games, soccer. I made 2 goals in soccer. It's such a rush where in front of the Trinity and like a couple hundred people, you make 2 goals. Oh man, it's the pride for your church. It comes out there. And yeah, even though I was having all of these ups, I would slip back into that kind of semi-depressive state where I would kind of really think about that situation. And yeah, I was also constantly praying that he didn't have to do surgery. Now, the next day, I was just walking to work. And I get a call from the SS. I was like, "Why'd you call me? Aren't you in the hospital?" And he went to the hospital, but he's back at home. I'm like, "You're back at home? I thought you were going to be, in the hospital for a whole week getting surgery." And what he said was amazing. That the doctor said that if he gets a cast, that because they put back the position of the dislocated shoulder, that if he puts it in a cast, that he's going to heal naturally. And when I heard that, I was really thanking God. I was like, because there's no one around me, it's like total countryside where I live. I was like shouting. I was like, "Man, that is so good news." And I was like, "Thank you, God." And I was giving praise to God. And I was like thanking. And I was like, man, that was the biggest thing. That was the first thing I was really grateful to God, right? Just thankful that he didn't have to go through surgery. Now, the second thing I was very thankful for was something else. So right before lunch, we were bike riding, and there was a situation where that SS and a couple SS joined our group, and we were going to lunch. And I made sure that they stayed, back into a line, and made sure that they were, following my orders. And what I realized was this SS that, in the future got, very injured, and one other SS was not wearing a helmet. And I rebuked them, and I said, "Wear a helmet." And I got a little bit mad. I wouldn't say a lot mad, but I made sure that, this SS put his helmet on. And yeah, that if it's scary, but if he didn't have a helmet, then something very different could have happened. Because if you don't have a helmet and you're going 20 kilometers per hour, and you suddenly stop, you get flown off, and you don't have a helmet, then it's really hard to not get some brain damage with that. So I'm really thankful that God kind of used me to really make sure that SS was safe, at least didn't have any permanent damage. Yeah, those are the 2 things I was extremely grateful, because yeah, it was a really stressful time. for me, the SS, also for the parents and everyone. So yeah, I just wanted to give a testimony about this whole situation because it really made me have some perspective and really make me think about God and think about the SS. And it really made me think about how valuable a life is, right? How God really in very weird ways really protects us, right? As God used me to make sure that the SS was wearing a helmet when he fell. God uses people in very weird ways to save you from certain danger. That's what I truly believe, and that's what I am truly thankful for. Yeah, that's all I have for you today. To everyone who enjoyed this podcast episode and is going until the end, let's walk this path together. Peace out, guys. Bye-bye.
And that's a big amen for that wonderful testimony. And I'm very, very grateful that his friend got better and was able to heal naturally without surgery. That is an amazing testimony. So thankful that he was able to share that with us on the last day of this week. I hope that everyone was also receiving a lot of grace. Everyone have an amazing and awesome day. And we'll see you guys again on Monday. Oh, don't forget, guys, tomorrow is ProviCom, so make sure you watch that one too. And then we'll see you guys again on Monday on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, I'm on the Morning Star